Okay, so today we're tackling a really big one. It's a book called Planet on Fire, a manifesto for the age of environmental breakdown. It's by Mathew Lawrence and Laurie Laybourn-Langton. And trust me, it's a challenging read, but so important. So let's just dive right in.
So the authors kick things off with a story, and it's a story that probably feels really familiar to a lot of you. It's this powerful cautionary tale that comes from a tiny, super remote island way out in the Pacific.
Yeah, I'm talking about Easter Island, or as it's properly known, Rapa Nui. You can picture it, right? The lost civilization, those absolutely incredible giant stone statues, and of course the story of its collapse, which has basically become this go-to parable for the whole world.
And the popular version of that story, well, it goes something like this, right? The islanders got obsessed with building these statues. It was some kind of competition. And in their craze, they chopped down every last tree. They completely wrecked their own ecosystem. And in the end, literally starved themselves out of existence. It's presented as the textbook case of ecocide. And look, this wasn't just some random myth. This narrative was really cemented in the public mind thanks to huge bestsellers like Jared Diamond's Collapse. He famously called it the clearest example of a society that destroyed itself. And that's how we've come to see it, as this profound warning about our own self-destructive human nature, right?
Well, this is where the book just hits the brakes and makes a really dramatic turn. Because it turns out the real story of how the Rapa Nui society collapsed, it has nothing to do with self-destruction. It's actually a tale of extraction.
And this is really the central pivot of their whole argument. The authors just state it bluntly. That whole ecocide story we've been told about Easter Island, it is simply not true. So you gotta ask, what really happened then?
Okay, let's just look at the actual historical timeline here. The devastation, it didn't start from within. No way. It kicked off in 1722 with the first arrival of Europeans, who brought violence and disease with them. And then the real collapse got put on fast forward because of these brutal Peruvian slave raids in the 1860s, which was followed by smallpox epidemics. And then, the final nail in the coffin, Chile annexed the island and basically turned the whole place into a giant sheep farm.
So the key takeaway here, the absolutely crucial point, is that the collapse wasn't caused by some short-sighted locals. It was driven from the outside by violent colonial contact, by premeditated slave raids that captured over 1,000 people, by deadly foreign diseases, and finally by an ecosystem that was just completely wiped out by tens of thousands of sheep, all brought there for profit.
And this is where we get to the absolute core of the book's argument. Because you see, this story of Easter Island, it's not just about setting the historical record straight. It's meant to be a powerful allegory for what's happening to our entire planet right now.
It just perfectly illustrates the two competing stories, doesn't it? On the one hand, you have the myth, which blames the inhabitants themselves, this whole idea of a tragedy of the commons. But then you have the reality, which points the finger at external forces, things like colonial expansion and a globalized system hell-bent on seeking profit. Starting to see the parallel for today?
And this leads us straight to the book's most important claim. Fundamentally, they argue, environmental breakdown is not about some flaw in human nature, and it's not just about a lack of individual awareness. At its core, it is all about power.
So what's the real problem, according to the book? The authors argue it's a system they call extractive capitalism. And what is that? Well, it's a system that's just hardwired for competition, for endless growth, and for the exploitation of both people and nature, all in the name of profit. They're saying the exact same forces that destroyed Rapa Nui are now at work on a planetary scale.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, then what's the prescription? What's the cure?
Well, this book isn't content to just analyze the problem.
No, it goes further and proposes a really radical solution. It's a true manifesto for change. And they give it a name, 21st Century Ecosocialism. Okay, so what in the world does that actually mean? Well, simply put, it's about a collective effort to basically democratize our economic and political institutions. It's about repurposing them so that their goal isn't just pure profit, but instead social and environmental well-being for all of us.
And the authors are really clear here. The goal is not just sustainability. It's not about just slapping some solar panels on the system we already have and calling it a day. It is way more ambitious than that. It's about building an economy that is fundamentally democratic from the ground up, and replacing our current economy of extraction with one that's actually based on care, the common good, and solidarity.
Okay, so that's the vision. But how do we actually get there? Well, the book lays out a pretty clear path forward. It's a vision for a democratic, green future that's built on a few really concrete transformations.
They break it down into a three-part transformation. First up, socialized finance. What does that mean? It means steering investment toward things we actually need, like green jobs and social programs, instead of just chasing the highest profit. Step 2, democratize corporations. So instead of only shareholders having control, you create social firms where all stakeholders, that means workers, communities, everyone involved, gets a real say. And finally, step 3, expand the commons. This is about bringing crucial resources like land, our data, and our energy systems under collective, democratic control.
And what's really important to stress here is that the authors argue this isn't a future of scarcity or sacrifice. That's not the point. The vision here is to build economies that are democratic and sustainable by their very design. The goal is to create the conditions where everyone has the chance to not just survive, but to actually, truly thrive.
Which, leaves us with a really powerful final question to think about. The story of our planet, just like the real story of Easter Island, has for a very long time been written by the powerful. So the book leaves us asking, who gets to write the next chapter? Is it going to be those same old forces of extraction? Or is it going to be all of us deciding together?